Could you imagine being a detective, haunted by a cold case for years, a ghost in a filing cabinet that refuses to rest? You've stared at the victim's photo, you've walked the crime scene in your mind 1,000 times, and you've come up with nothing but dead ends. Now imagine it's been 45 years. The world has changed, technology has leaped into science fiction, but the ghost remains. For true crime lovers who believe that justice has no expiration date, this story is for you. It's an evolution in crime solving that redefines the very meaning of a cold case. So stick around, because you're about to witness how a revolutionary new technique finally cornered a phantom. What if the key to unlocking a 45-year-old mystery, the identity of a brutal killer who haunted a university town, was hiding in plain sight on a disposable coffee cup he'd just thrown away? Palo Alto, California, in the early 1970s. The air was thick with the scent of eucalyptus and the fervent energy of a generation questioning everything. At the heart of this idyllic, sun-drenched landscape was Stanford University, a beacon of intellectualism and progressive thought. It was a place where students sprawled on manicured lawns, debating philosophy and dreaming of changing the world. It felt like the safest place on earth, an academic sanctuary insulated from the darkness that lurked in the wider world. But evil is a patient predator, and it was about to shatter this illusion of security, leaving a scar on the community that would ache for nearly half a century. In this world of hope and promise lived Leslie Marie Pirloof. At 21, Leslie was a force of nature, brilliant, vivacious, and full of a fiery passion for justice. She had graduated from Stanford and was working as a law clerk in a local firm, her sights set on law school. Her older sister, Diane, remembers her as someone who was not only intelligent but deeply empathetic, a young woman who felt things profoundly and dreamed of using her life to make a difference. On Tuesday, February the 13th, 1973, Leslie was working at the law firm in Palo Alto. She left work that afternoon, planning a short trip up to a quiet, hilly area on the outskirts of the Stanford campus, a place known locally as the Quarry. She needed to retrieve a set of encyclopedias she had stored at a friend's cottage. She was last seen driving her bright orange Chevrolet Nova, a vibrant car for a vibrant soul, heading towards the hills as the afternoon sun began to dip towards the Pacific. Just over a year later, another young woman's life was about to intersect with this unfolding tragedy, though she would never know it. Janet Ann Taylor, also 21, was the daughter of Chuck Taylor, a beloved figure who had been Stanford's athletic director and a former head football coach. Janet was known for her infectious laugh and her kind, gentle spirit. She was fiercely independent and had recently moved into a cottage of her own, embracing the freedom of young adulthood. On the afternoon of March 24, 1974, she was driving home, her mind likely on the simple, everyday things that make up a life. Her journey took her down Sand Hill Road, a winding, scenic route that cut through the open spaces bordering the western edge of the campus, not far from where Leslie Pirloof had vanished 13 months earlier. Living a quiet life just a few counties away in Hayward was a man named John Arthur Getro. To his neighbors, he was an unremarkable figure, a husband, a father of two, a man who worked in security. He was a veteran who had served in the U.S. Army. On the surface, he was the picture of suburban normalcy. But beneath this placid exterior lay a secret, a darkness that had taken root long ago, an ocean away. In 1963, while stationed in West Germany, a 15-year-old girl named Ava Maria Patalas, the daughter of the superintendent of the army barracks where Getro was based, was found brutally raped and murdered. The investigation led to John Getro, then just 18 years old. He was arrested, tried in a German court, and convicted of the heinous crime. But because of his youth, he was tried as a juvenile. He served only a handful of years before being released and returning to the United States, his slate wiped clean in the eyes of the American legal system. He settled in California, married, and started a family. the chilling secret of his past buried deep. He was a predator who had already killed and, having gotten away with it so lightly, had learned that he could hide in plain sight. The evening of February 13th, 1973, bled into the night, and Leslie Pirloof did not return home. A gnawing worry began to creep into the hearts of her friends and family. This was not like Leslie. She was responsible, always in touch. The next day, her little orange Nova was found, abandoned on a dirt turnout off a service road in the hills. The car was locked, her purse still inside. There was no sign of a struggle and no sign of Leslie. A knot of pure dread tightened in the community. For 3 agonizing days, a massive search was launched. Police officers, deputies, and worried student volunteers fanned out across the rolling, oak-studded hills. They combed through the thick brush and called her name until their voices were raw, the sound swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape. The search felt desperate, a race against a clock that was ticking with terrifying speed. On the 3rd day, February 16th, a searcher made a devastating discovery. Under the sprawling branches of a live oak tree, partially hidden from view, lay the body of Leslie Pirloof. The scene was one of profound violence that stood in stark, brutal contrast to the peaceful surroundings. She was lying on her back, her clothes disheveled. The cause of death was immediately apparent and chillingly intimate. She had been strangled. A patterned scarf had been stuffed deep into her mouth, and around her neck, the instrument of her death was still cinched tight. It was a horrifying detail that spoke to a cold, calculated rage. The killer had left his mark, but in the days before DNA, the evidence police could gather was limited. They had a crime scene, a victim, and a community plunged into fear, but they had no face, no name, and no direction. For 13 months, the memory of Leslie's murder hung over Palo Alto like a persistent fog. The initial terror subsided into a low-grade anxiety. People tried to believe it was a tragic but isolated incident. Then, on March the 25th, 1974, the nightmare returned. A driver on Sand Hill Road, a man on his way to work in the early morning light, noticed something in a shallow, weed-choked ditch by the side of the road. He slowed down, squinting, and his blood ran cold. It was the body of a young woman. The authorities were called, and the scene was soon swarming with shaken deputies from the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office. The victim was quickly identified as Janet Taylor. Her car was found a short distance away, abandoned, just as Leslie Pirloof's had been. The parallels were immediate and undeniable. Another young woman, just 21 years old, found discarded in a remote area bordering the Stanford campus. When the coroner's report was completed, it confirmed what everyone already feared. Janet Taylor had been strangled. The method was the same. The rage was the same. The terror that had been simmering for a year erupted. It was no longer a single random act of violence. This was the work of a predator. A serial killer was haunting this idyllic college town. The press gave him a name that sent a shudder through the community: the Stanford Strangler. The illusion of safety was gone, replaced by the terrifying reality that a monster was walking among them, and no one knew who he was or when he would strike again. In the 1970s, homicide investigation was a grueling shoe leather and instinct affair. Detectives from Santa Clara County, handling the Pirloof case, and San Mateo County, handling the Taylor case, immediately formed a task force. They knew they were hunting the same man. They interviewed hundreds of people, friends, family, acquaintances of the victims, known sex offenders, and anyone who might have been in the vicinity of the crimes. They chased down every lead, no matter how small, but each one led to a frustrating dead end. The killer was a ghost. He left no fingerprints. No credible witnesses came forward. He was meticulous, careful, and seemingly invisible. John Arthur Getro, the quiet family man, was never on their radar. His juvenile conviction in Germany was buried, inaccessible to American law enforcement at the time. The investigation, for all its manpower and dedication, eventually ran out of steam. The leads dried up, and the files, thick with reports and dead ends, were eventually moved to the back of the cabinet, officially labeled cold. Imagine you are the lead detective in 1975. The trail is ice cold. The press is silent, and the public's attention has moved on, but you can't let it go. You have 2 victims strangled found near Stanford and a killer who seems to be a phantom. What is your most crucial next step to keep the case alive? A. Publicly release a detailed psychological profile of the killer to try and rattle him. B. Meticulously preserve all physical evidence from the crime scenes, no matter how insignificant it seems, in the hope that future technology might unlock its secrets. C. Dedicate resources to investigating any and all peeping Tom or minor sex crime reports in the area from the past 2 years, looking for a pattern of escalation. The investigators of the time did their best with the tools they had, but the correct answer, the one that would ultimately matter, was B. In a decision that can only be described as a stroke of incredible foresight, the evidence from both murders, the clothing, the scrapings, the fibers, was carefully, almost religiously, preserved. For decades, it sat in evidence lockers, a silent testament to a crime that refused to be forgotten. The years turned into decades. The 1970s gave way to the 80s, then the 90s. The world changed. Children of the victims' friends grew up, went to college, and started their own families. The case files were passed down from one generation of cold case detectives to the next. For the Pirloof and Taylor families, it was a wound that never healed. Every anniversary, every birthday, was a painful reminder of the justice that had been denied. Then, in the early 2000s, a revolution in forensic science breathed new life into the case. DNA analysis, once the stuff of science fiction, was now a standard tool. Cold case detectives from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office, including a tenacious sergeant named Rick Alanis, decided to re-examine the evidence that had been so carefully saved. They sent Leslie Pirloof's pants, worn on the day she was murdered, to the crime lab. The result was a bombshell. Lab technicians were able to isolate a full DNA profile of an unknown male from a semen stain on the outside of her trousers. Hope surged through the department. They had the killer's genetic fingerprint. Simultaneously, detectives in San Mateo County submitted Janet Taylor's coat to their crime lab. In another stunning breakthrough, they too isolated a male DNA profile from the back of her coat. The 2 samples were compared. The result was the first concrete link in 30 years. The DNA from both crime scenes was a perfect match. It was official. One man, this single ghostly figure, had murdered both Leslie Pirloof and Janet Taylor. Investigators rushed to upload the profile to CODIS, the national database of criminal DNA, their hearts pounding with anticipation. They were certain they were about to get a name. The result came back, no match. The killer, despite his brutality, had never been arrested or convicted of a felony in the United States that required him to submit a DNA sample. The case hit a brick wall, a technological dead end that was almost more frustrating than the silence of the previous decades. It's now 2018. You are Sergeant Alanis. The DNA proves one man killed both women, but he's not in the system. The trail is cold again. But you hear whispers of a radical, controversial new technique that's solving impossible cases. What do? A. Hope that the killer's relative commits a crime and their familial DNA flags a match in CODIS, which could take years, if ever. B. Publicize the killer's DNA profile, hoping a former partner or an estranged family member recognizes the story and comes forward. C. Partner with a private lab to use genetic genealogy, uploading the killer's DNA to public ancestry databases to try and build his family tree. The answer, of course, was... In 2018, the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office took a leap of faith and contacted Parabon Nanolabs, a company pioneering the field of investigative genetic genealogy. They handed over the killer's DNA profile to a team led by the brilliant and renowned genealogist C.C. Moore. What happened next was nothing short of a miracle of modern science. C.C. Moore and her team took the raw DNA data and created a profile that they could upload to public genealogy websites like GEDmatch, sites where ordinary people upload their own DNA results to find relatives and build their family trees. Instantly, they got hits. The killer had distant relatives, third and fourth cousins, who had submitted their DNA. This was the thread. For weeks, Moore and her team worked backward, meticulously building a vast, complex family tree. They traced bloodlines back to the 1800s, identifying common ancestors, and then began working forward, branch by branch, generation by generation. It was a monumental task of digital detective work, eliminating entire family lines until they narrowed the search down to one specific family. The tree led them to a set of parents who had 3 sons. Their surname was Getro. The investigation snapped back into the physical world with electrifying focus. Detectives now had 3 names. They quickly learned that one of the brothers had died, and another had been too young and lived too far away at the time of the murders. That left one man, John Arthur Getro, now 74 years old, living a quiet life in Haywood. The surveillance began. Plainclothes detectives staked out Getro's home. They watched him come and go. They needed to get a sample of his DNA to make a direct comparison, but they had to do it legally, without him knowing. They needed him to abandon a piece of his DNA. For days they shadowed him, their frustration mounting. Finally, one morning they followed him to a local coffee shop. They watched through long-lensed cameras as he sat and drank his coffee. When he finished, he threw the disposable cup and lid into a public garbage can and walked away. The moment he was out of sight, a detective moved in. He reached into the bin and retrieved the cup. It was rushed to the Santa Clara County Crime Lab. The tension was unbearable. Lab technicians swabbed the lip of the cup, extracted the DNA, and began the comparison. It was the moment of truth, the culmination of 45 years of waiting. Then the call came. It was a perfect 100% match. The DNA on the coffee cup was the same as the DNA found on Leslie Pirloof in 1973. It was the same as the DNA found on Janet Taylor in 1974. They had him. The ghost had a name, and his name was John Arthur Getro. On November the 20th, 2018, nearly 46 years after Leslie Pirloof's murder, a team of detectives knocked on the door of John Getro's home in Haywood. The 74-year-old man who answered the door was met not with questions, but with an arrest warrant. He was taken into custody for the murder of Leslie Marie Pirloof. The shock was palpable, not just for Getro, but for his family and neighbors, who couldn't fathom that the quiet old man next door was the infamous Stanford Strangler. The legal proceedings began, and the full weight of the decades-old crimes finally descended upon Getro. Faced with the irrefutable DNA evidence, he made a decision. On January 14, 2021, John Arthur Getro pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder of Leslie Pirloof. In the courtroom, Leslie's sister Diane finally had the chance to face the man who had stolen her sister and haunted her family for a lifetime. Her victim impact statement was a testament to enduring love and unimaginable loss. "For 45 years I have lived with the horror of what you did to my sister," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "You took a brilliant light from this world. You had a life, a family, you got to grow old. Leslie never did. She is forever 21. Getro was sentenced to life in prison. But justice wasn't finished. The San Mateo County District Attorney's Office proceeded with the case for the murder of Janet Taylor. Getro pleaded not guilty, forcing a trial. In September 2021, a jury listened intently as prosecutors laid out the case. The DNA, the striking similarities between the murders, the unmasking of a serial predator. The defense was weak, unable to refute the genetic evidence. After a short deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Janet Taylor's family, too, had their moment to speak to the court. Her father, Chuck Taylor, had lived long enough to see Getro arrested, but had passed away before the trial. Her siblings spoke of the vibrant sister they had lost and the shadow that her unsolved murder cast over their entire lives. John Getro received a second life sentence, ensuring he would die in prison. The resolution of the Stanford murders sent ripples across the country. It was a landmark case, a powerful testament to the revolutionary power of investigative genetic genealogy. It offered a profound sense of hope to countless other families of cold case victims, a promise that even after decades of silence, answers were still possible. For the Palo Alto and Stanford communities, the unmasking of Getro brought a sorrowful but necessary closure, finally naming the source of a fear that had lingered for a generation. A monster had not just visited their town. He had been created, in a sense, by a justice system that had let him go once before, allowing him to return to society and kill again. The case of John Arthur Getro is a chilling study in the duality of human nature. It reminds us that the most monstrous evil can wear the most mundane of masks. For 45 years he lived a life that Leslie Pirloof and Janet Taylor were brutally denied. He raised a family, grew old, and blended seamlessly into the fabric of society, a ghost hiding a horrific secret in the light of day. He was the quiet neighbor, the unassuming old man, a living embodiment of the darkness that can lurk just beneath the surface of a seemingly normal life. But this story is not just about the darkness. It is, perhaps more powerfully, a story of enduring light. It's about the tenacity of justice, the refusal of dedicated investigators to let a case die. It's about the incredible foresight of those who preserved the evidence, banking on a future they couldn't yet imagine. Most of all, it's a story about the unwavering love of two families who refused to let the memories of their daughter and sister fade into a cold case file. They kept the flame of hope alive through decades of silence and uncertainty. Getro, the meticulous killer, the man who thought he had committed the perfect crimes, failed to account for two unstoppable forces: the relentless march of science and the profound power of a family's love. In the end, it was a discarded coffee cup that sealed his fate, a trivial piece of trash that became the final, damning link in a chain of evidence stretching back nearly half a century. Justice, it turns out, is not always swift, but for Leslie Pirloof and Janet Taylor, it was finally absolute.